Alright. Hi everyone. This is Agatha Magsombol and thank you so much for tuning in with me today. So, you may be wondering what this is about. Well, for those of you who know me personally, you're quite familiar that I'm more of a writer who's more expressive with my words when I write them down. That is why I started my own blog in 2018. I put the link on the description box below. You guys can read some if you want. But honestly, I have always wanted to start my own podcast, as ironic as it is. Um, I think I think the year after I started my blog, a seed planted in me that I should start a podcast someday too. It's one of those notions where sometimes, diba, um, pag may thoughts tayo, mas nagkakaroon ng essence when we write them down. Or vice versa. If ako, personally, if may ikikwento ako sa friend ko, magpapaalam muna ako na, wait, pwede ko bang i-voice message kasi ang hirap i-type. So, yun. Since exciting yung kwento, I just want to share it out loud na lang. So, the idea of hosting both a blog and a podcast can actually be possible for me. Even though I am an ambivert with a social battery, I have always took an interest in deep and meaningful conversations. Whenever I share them with my friends and loved ones, it always leaves an insightful feeling in my chest. Plus, as an only child, I would often think out loud about my own thoughts and experiences or just randomly talk to my dog as if she were my therapist. But during those times when I converse with myself, I would just consider them as conversations with God, since I believe He is listening no matter how random or sad or happy the topic is. Again, as I mentioned, it's ironic since I am an expressive writer than as a speaker. But this is me trying out a new thing and fulfilling a dream by stepping out of my comfort zone. So, everybody, welcome to the Soaring Stories Podcast, a collaborative podcast that I thought of because, like I mentioned earlier, I appreciate meaningful connections with meaningful people. I love to hear about inspiring thoughts and experiences with others and telling stories as we share them with the world. The goal of this project is to be able to engage in conversations with different people in my life and let others hear about what we think in order to hopefully be an inspiration. So it's not just gonna be me who'll talk for an entire episode, except for this one, since this is the introduction episode. But for the rest of the episodes, I'll be joined by guests whom I'll invite every month. I love the idea of being collaborative with people because we get to mix our skills and talents to be able to create something amazing. I remember the blog I wrote a couple of years ago during World Mental Health Day. I think that was in October of 2021. I'm not really sure. Pero ilagay ko po yung link sa description again if you guys want to read that. So that's another one of the collaborative projects that I did with my friends because I asked them to write their own poems, however you guys pronounce that. They wrote about mental health and then I compiled them with mine and it turned out to be really good. So to me, it's a win-win situation because we get to help each other. I get to promote a friend's skill or project through my platform. And another example of this is the logo and the layouts of this podcast because my best friend, Isay Fabian, helped me make them since it's her thing as a graphic artist. She also made the logo of my blog. So we consider this as another collaboration for us. You can follow her works on Instagram. I put the link of her profile down at the description box as well. And then another collab is the music for this podcast. It's edited by some of my friends. I asked, I think, 3 of my friends to help me edit sounds for this podcast. So every month I would post the link of their profile on the description so you can just familiarize yourselves with who they are, since they are musically inclined and have the skill to create sounds. So yeah, I honestly believe that in the world we live in, and out of every minute we spend throughout every single day, there's always a story to tell, a lesson to learn, and an experience to share. I'm excited for the upcoming episodes in the next months with the future guests to be featured. I promise it's gonna be fun. But you might be curious as to why it's called Soaring Stories and what's the quote-unquote story behind the logo. Why is it a paper airplane? Well, that's actually an interesting, again, quote-unquote story. So originally, I was going to name it the Poetry in Motion podcast, since I've always been so hooked and fascinated by the power of poetry. I love collecting and reading poetry books, I love writing poems, and I love analyzing them. They're a big factor as to why I started my blog, and why this podcast came to be. I love how words are played together to create a meaning despite its length and arrangement. I love the hidden clues in every stanza and how you can associate art within it. So naming a podcast Poetry in Motion is actually a smart and interesting idea because the poetry is literally in motion, since the sound of our voices, sharing stories, is creating an impact on listeners. But before that, I did a quick Google search to see if the name was already taken. Unfortunately, it was. So I thought of other names. But since medyo makulit ako, I was still continuing with Poetry in Motion. So, nagtry akong i-translate siya into Hebrew or German or even French just to create a fancy title. But none of them worked. So I had to change the name completely. And I'm glad I did before I asked my best friend to create a logo. So I eventually thought about Soaring Stories. I thought about the purpose of this podcast, how it's interactive, and how it aims to connect with people by sharing stories with each other. The paper airplane concept comes from the idea that someone's story is written on a piece of paper, then it's folded into a paper airplane. So once the paper airplane is made, it's thrown so that it can fly up in the sky and soar to whoever is destined to read and be inspired by it. So I guess, and I hope, there's this sense of poetry there. It's quite a simple concept, and that's what I'm going for when I thought about the logo as well. Quite minimalist, not overly complicated, and not too generic either. Something that would hopefully make sense and give an iconic feeling. So, if you're like me, someone who enjoys listening to podcasts while doing chores, working out, reading, or whatever type of activity, then I hope you'll enjoy listening to this one. Each guest for every month are people who mean a lot to me, and we'll be talking about topics based on the theme of the month or whatever's going on in our minds. I promise you'll enjoy. And speaking of guests, stay tuned for next episode on April. I'll be chatting with one of my closest friends to talk about something I feel like we could all relate to. Well guys, I think I could end for here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. I hope you could follow the podcast on Facebook and Instagram. I'll put the links at the description below as usual. And don't forget to like and subscribe as well, and hit the notification bell to let you know if the new episode's here. Thank you again, and see you on the next one.